The ballroom glowed with crystal lights. Everyone clapped as my parents stood proudly beside my brother, Daniel. He was their perfect son. Tonight, they gave him the keys to a mansion, 3 luxury cars, and a bank transfer of $995 million. Their smiles were brighter than the diamonds on Mother's neck. I sat quietly at the back, watching the celebration. I have Down syndrome. My parents never said it kindly. They whispered that I was slow, weak, and a burden. They never expected much from me. When Father raised his glass and said, "Daniel is the pride of our family," the crowd cheered. My heart sank. Not once did he mention my name. Not once did I matter. Everyone saw Daniel as golden. I was invisible, a shadow in the same bloodline. That night, shame wrapped around me tighter than chains. I wanted to be happy for my brother, but I could not. Deep inside, I felt a quiet fire. They thought I was nothing, but I knew this was only the beginning of my story. Before I tell you how I got my revenge, hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. The day after Daniel's grand celebration, the house felt different. My parents walked past me as if I were invisible. Their voices were filled with pride when they spoke about him, but when they looked at me, their eyes carried disappointment. I was born with Down syndrome. To them, that meant I could never be strong, never be smart, never be worthy. They treated me like I was broken. While Daniel was praised for every achievement, I was reminded of my limits. I sat at the long dining table, but no one spoke to me. The servants brought food, yet my plate was always smaller, my seat always at the corner. Father discussed business deals with Daniel, ignoring me completely. "Ryan," Mother finally said, her voice sharp, "you should be grateful for what we give you. Don't expect more." But what did they give me? Not love, not honor, not a place in the family. They gave me shame. That night, as I lay awake in my small room, I realized the truth: I was not just forgotten. I was unwanted. And something inside me whispered, one day, they would regret it. A week later, Father called me into his study. His face was cold, his voice sharp. "Ryan," he said, "this house is not for you anymore. Daniel needs space. You will live in the old chalet." My heart froze. The chalet was where servants and strangers stayed, dusty, broken, and far from the main house. I tried to speak, but words stumbled out slowly. "But I am your son too." Father's eyes narrowed. "You are not like Daniel. You must learn your place." Mother stood by the window, silent, her pearls shining but her heart dark. Daniel smirked, leaning against the wall, enjoying every second. That evening, I carried my small bag of clothes out the front door. The guards didn't look at me. Servants whispered as I walked past. My brother stood tall on the balcony, keys to his mansion in hand, watching me leave with nothing. Love revenge stories? Subscribe now. We drop new ones every week, raw, emotional, and full of justice. Don't miss the next chapter. The chalet smelled of damp wood and old dust. The bed creaked. The floor was cracked. I sat down, tears falling quietly. I was their son, but now I was treated like a stranger. Like less than nothing. And deep in that silence, a seed of strength began to grow. Life in the chalet was quiet, but not peaceful. Days passed with only the sound of servants moving about. I tried to stay invisible, but Daniel would not allow it. He came often, bringing his friends, just to laugh at me. One afternoon, they stood outside my small room. Daniel leaned against the doorway, smiling cruelly. "Look at him," he told his friends. "My brother lives like a servant. Isn't it pathetic?" They laughed. Their voices echoed through the walls, cutting deeper than knives. I kept my head down, wishing to disappear. My words always came slow, but my heart screamed fast. "Ryan," Daniel said loudly, "you were never meant for more. You should thank Father for not throwing you into the streets." His friends roared with laughter. I clenched my fists, but I did not fight back. They believed my Down syndrome made me weak, easy to mock, powerless to resist. They didn't know that every insult was feeding something inside me, something stronger than hate. When they finally left, their laughter still burned in my ears. I wiped my tears, staring at the cracked ceiling. If they saw weakness in me, one day, I would show them power. That night, I lay on the old bed in the chalet, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling. Memories of my childhood rushed back like waves I could not stop. I remembered when Mother once kissed my forehead, telling me I was special. I remembered when Father held my hand as I learned to walk. For a moment, I believed I was loved. But those days were gone. Now, I was only a mistake in their eyes. Daniel was the golden son, while I was the broken one. Every smile they gave him was a knife in my chest. I cried silently, careful not to let the servants hear. My tears fell onto the pillow, soaking the fabric with pain no one could see. Having Down syndrome never made me less human, but they treated me as if I was invisible. The house was filled with light and music for Daniel, while my world was filled with silence. Still, in that silence, I found something they could never take from me, hope. I whispered to myself, one day, they will see. One day, they will know my worth. And with those words, I finally closed my eyes. Life in the chalet was nothing like the mansion I once called home. The walls were damp, the floor cracked, and the air smelled of dust and mold. I shared space with tired servants and strangers who worked for my family. Their rooms were just as broken as mine. Every morning, I ate stale bread while the main house served feasts. My parents never visited, and Daniel never spoke my name unless it was to mock me. I was forgotten, left to rot in a corner of their empire. Some servants pitied me. They gave me small leftovers when they could, and I always thanked them with a smile. Having Down syndrome made me slower with words, but not with kindness. I listened to them when no one else cared. At night, I could hear laughter from the mansion, echoing across the grounds. It reminded me of the world I was no longer part of. Each laugh was a reminder that I had been replaced, cast aside. Still, while they thought they buried me in shame, something inside me was slowly growing. They saw weakness, but they never saw the strength hidden in silence. And silence was my friend. One afternoon, while I was sweeping the dusty floor of the chalet, loud laughter echoed from outside. Daniel had arrived, and with him came a group of his wealthy friends. They wore fine suits, polished shoes, and cruel smiles. Daniel pushed open my door without knocking. "Look, everyone," he said, pointing at me. "Here's my brother, living among servants like he belongs." His voice dripped with pride, as if shaming me was an accomplishment. His friends burst into laughter. One of them covered his nose. "Smells like poverty in here," he joked. Another added, "No wonder your parents hide him away. He doesn't fit the Spencer name." I felt my face burn. My Down syndrome made it hard to find words quickly, but my silence only gave them more courage to laugh. Daniel tossed a piece of bread on the floor and said, "There, Ryan, a gift for you." The group roared. Their laughter stabbed me deeper than any knife. When they finally left, I picked up the bread, not because I was hungry, but because I refused to waste even what was thrown at me. They thought I was powerless. But I knew one day, their laughter would choke them. The days in the chalet were filled with hard work and silence, but I discovered something the mansion never gave me, respect from people who had nothing. The servants, who once pitied me, began to see me differently. When someone was sick, I shared my bread. When another was too tired to clean, I helped sweep. My words came slowly, but they carried kindness. Slowly, they started looking at me not as the forgotten son, but as a friend. One evening, an old cook named Mariah said, "Ryan, you have more heart than anyone in that mansion." Her words lit a small flame inside me. For the first time, I felt valued. Having Down syndrome didn't make me weak, it made me notice what others ignored. I listened when no one else cared, and I forgave when others mocked. While Daniel bathed in wealth, he earned fear and fake smiles. But I, in my broken chalet, earned something he could never buy: loyalty. I realized then that strength wasn't about money, mansions, or power. True strength was quiet. It grew in silence, waiting for the right time. And I knew, my time would come. One rainy evening, the wind blew through the broken windows of the chalet. I tried to patch the cracks with old cloth when my hand brushed against a loose wooden board near the bed. Curious, I pulled it free and found a small leather book covered in dust. It was a diary. The cover was worn, but inside the handwriting was strong. As I turned the pages, I realized it belonged to my grandfather. He had written about the family, the business, and his dreams for the future. But one page made my hands shake. It spoke of me. "Ryan has a gentle soul," he wrote. "He is my true heir. Not because of his mind alone, but because of his heart. I will make sure he is protected." Tears blurred my vision. My grandfather had seen me, not my Down syndrome, not my slowness, but my heart. Why then had I been cast aside? Why had my parents ignored his words? I hugged the diary to my chest, feeling warmth in the cold room. For the first time in years, I didn't feel forgotten. Perhaps this old book was not just memories. Perhaps it was a key. I spent nights reading the diary by candlelight. Each page carried pieces of my grandfather's thoughts. He wrote of honor, fairness, and family legacy. But what struck me most was a promise he mentioned over and over: Ryan must never be left with nothing. "I will see to that." Those words repeated in my mind like a song. Grandfather had seen me, not as broken, but as worthy. He promised to protect me even when others wouldn't. But if that was true, where was it? Why had my parents given Daniel everything while I was sent to rot in a chalet? Something didn't add up. One entry mentioned a letter stored with his lawyer. My chest tightened with hope. Could it still exist? Could it prove that I wasn't forgotten? I closed the diary and stared at the cracked walls. My parents thought I was too weak to understand, too slow to question. But they were wrong. For the first time, I felt a spark of determination. Maybe I wasn't just the forgotten son. Maybe I was the son with a promise waiting to be uncovered. And promises, I knew, were stronger than lies. Backhand index pointing right. Do you want me to continue with Chapter 11, The Letter of Truth, 200 words, where Ryan takes the first step toward discovery? The next morning, I tucked grandfather's diary under my arm and walked into town. My heart pounded as I entered the lawyer's old office, a small building with dusty windows. Inside, a kind woman with silver hair looked at me curiously. I think my grandfather left something here," I said, holding up the diary. Her eyes widened at his name. "Yes, Mr. Peter was a client for many years. Wait here." She disappeared into the back room. I tapped my fingers nervously, whispering, "Please, grandfather, let it be true." When she returned, she carried a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. My name, Ryan Peter, was written across it in his careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I held it. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't care. For the first time, I knew I wasn't invisible. The woman smiled softly. "He wanted you to have this, no matter what." I left the office clutching the envelope, my chest burning with pride. Daniel thought I was forgotten, but he was wrong. My grandfather had remembered me. And in my hands, I carried the truth that could change everything. I sat on the park bench, the envelope shaking in my hands. For a moment, I was afraid to open it. What if it was just another note saying I didn't matter? But my grandfather's voice echoed in my heart, Ryan, never doubt yourself. With a deep breath, I tore it open. Inside was a letter written in strong, steady handwriting. My dear grandson Ryan, if you are reading this, it means you are ready to know the truth. The wealth of our family was never meant for greed or cruelty. It was meant to protect, to guide, and to honor. That is why I placed the true inheritance under your name. My eyes widened. True inheritance. He explained that years ago, he had created a secret will. While my parents and Daniel believed they controlled everything, the actual rights to the family's biggest investments, properties, and even hidden accounts were tied to me. At the bottom, his words struck my heart: you may have Down syndrome, Ryan, but you have more wisdom and kindness than all of them combined. Never forget, you are the true heir. I clutched the letter, whispering, "Thank you, grandfather." The letter kept me awake all night. My grandfather's words echoed in my head: you are the true heir. For so long, I thought my Down syndrome made me less. But maybe, just maybe, I was stronger than they ever believed. The next morning, I went back to the lawyer, Mr. Collins, with the letter. His eyes widened as he read. "Ryan," he said, "your grandfather wasn't just talking about property. He left you access to secret accounts, funds hidden overseas and in trusts your parents never knew about." He slid a folder across the table. Numbers, banks, signatures, all real. My heart raced. This is mine." I whispered. "Yes," he said firmly. "Your parents rewrote their will to erase you, but they couldn't erase what your grandfather locked away. You control more than they do. If you stay quiet and careful, you can reclaim everything." I thought of Daniel laughing at me, calling me useless. I thought of my parents tossing me out like garbage. Now the truth burned in my chest. I wasn't the forgotten son. I was the hidden heir. And soon, they would know it. As I walked back to the chalet, clutching the folder, I heard footsteps behind me. "Ryan," a gentle voice whispered. I turned. It was Samuel, the oldest servant in our family home. His wrinkled hands trembled, but his eyes were kind. "I've served your family for 40 years, he said softly. "I know what they've done to you." I couldn't stay silent anymore. He pulled a bundle of papers from his coat. "These are copies of documents your parents tried to destroy. Your grandfather trusted me to keep them safe. He told me you would need them one day." I opened the papers. They matched the letter: bank accounts, hidden shares, and property deeds. Proof. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Samuel smiled sadly. "Because kindness should be rewarded, not punished. I've seen how your brother mocks the staff, how your parents belittle you. But I've also seen you share food with us, comfort children, and smile through pain. Your grandfather was right, you're the true heir." Tears stung my eyes. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. I had an ally. I gripped Samuel's hand and whispered, "Then it's time they face the truth." That night, Samuel and I sat at the old wooden table in the chalet. He spread the papers across it like pieces of a broken puzzle. My hands shook as I read line after line. "Look here," Samuel pointed. "These signatures, your grandfather's name, it isn't real. They forged it." I leaned closer. The handwriting looked strange, rushed, and the ink was newer than the rest of the document. My chest tightened. My parents hadn't just forgotten me. They erased me on purpose. They wanted Daniel to have it all, I whispered. Samuel nodded. "But forging a will is a crime. If you bring this forward, no court will ignore it." I thought of Daniel in his mansion, boasting about being the perfect heir. I thought of my parents, celebrating him while pushing me into shadows. And now I held proof of their lies. "Ryan," Samuel said, his voice steady, "this is your weapon. Use it wisely." I pressed my hand over the forged signature. For years, they treated me as if my Down syndrome made me weak. But weakness doesn't uncover the truth. Strength does. And now, the truth was finally mine. The following week, I slipped quietly into town after sunset. Mr. Collins, the lawyer, waited in a small office above a bakery. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, but our meeting carried only the weight of secrets. He locked the door behind me. "Ryan, we must be careful. If your parents discover what we're doing, they'll try to silence you." I laid the forged documents and my grandfather's letter on the table. Collins studied them with sharp eyes. "This is strong evidence. With these papers and Samuel's testimony, we can prove fraud." I felt my chest tighten. "But if we go to court now, they'll crush me. Daniel has money, power, and influence. Who would believe me?" Collins leaned closer. "Not yet. We gather more. Quietly. Patiently. You'll need allies, not just proof. When the time comes, we'll reveal everything at once." I nodded. Silence had always been my world, mocked into quiet, pushed aside into shadows. But this silence was different. It was powerful. For the first time, my Down syndrome wasn't a weakness. It gave me patience, the kind my brother would never understand. The game had begun. Days turned into weeks, and little by little, Collins and Samuel helped me piece together the truth. The hidden accounts, the secret deeds, the forged signatures, each was another weapon placed into my hands. One evening, Collins leaned back in his chair and said, "Ryan, you don't realize it yet, but you already control more than your brother. The shares your grandfather gave you are enough to make you the largest owner in the family's estate." I blinked. "You mean Daniel isn't the heir?" "Not legally," Collins confirmed. "On paper, the power is yours. He's living on a throne built from lies." My heart pounded. All my life, I'd been treated like I was invisible, useless, less. But here, on documents stamped with seals and signatures, I saw the truth. Daniel's mansion, his cars, his luxury, none of it was secure. I, the forgotten son with Down syndrome, had the true claim. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt taller, stronger. I whispered to myself, the throne was mine all along. And soon, my parents and Daniel would learn that the power they denied me was already in my hands. Power is not always taken with noise. Sometimes, it spreads like whispers in the dark. It began with Samuel. He told the other servants the truth, that I wasn't weak, that I wasn't forgotten, that I was the rightful heir. At first, they stared in silence. But then, I saw hope in their eyes. "Ryan has always treated us with respect," one cook said. "If this is true, I'd rather serve him than Daniel." Word moved quietly, from the kitchen to the stables, from the stables to the gardeners. They remembered the times I shared my food, fixed broken tools, or sat with their children. My kindness had left marks Daniel never could erase. Soon, workers in town began to hear the same whispers. People shook their heads at Daniel's arrogance and cruelty, while their voices softened when they spoke of me. Collins smiled when he heard the news. "This is how power grows, Ryan. Not just with documents, but with loyalty. When the truth breaks open, the people will already be on your side." I nodded. For the first time, silence was no longer loneliness. It was strength. The whispers had begun their march toward justice. The invitation arrived like a slap in the face. My parents were hosting a grand dinner to celebrate Daniel's brilliance and his future as the family's rightful heir. Gold letters on heavy paper, meant to impress. I wasn't supposed to be invited, but one of the cooks slipped me a copy. "You need to be there, Ryan," she whispered. "It's time." That night, the mansion sparkled with chandeliers and polished floors. Expensive cars lined the driveway. Laughter floated through the windows as music played. Guests raised their glasses to Daniel, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my entire chalet. My parents beamed with pride, smiling as though the world belonged to him. I stood outside in the cold, clutching my grandfather's letter, Samuel's documents, and Colin's advice. My heart pounded, but not with fear. This was the moment everything had led to. Inside, I heard Daniel's voice booming. To the perfect son. The heir of our family's future. The room roared with applause. I stepped forward, my shadow falling across the glowing doors. They had their stage. Now it was my turn. The hall fell silent the moment I stepped inside. My clothes were simple, my shoes worn, but I carried something stronger than silk or gold, truth. Daniel's glass froze halfway to his lips. My parents stiffened, eyes narrowing as though I had spoiled their perfect show. Guests turned, whispering, confused by my presence. "Ryan," my father said sharply. "This is not the place for you." But I didn't move. I lifted my grandfather's letter and the bundle of papers Samuel had saved. My voice shook at first, but then grew steady. "Actually, this is exactly the place." Gasps echoed as I laid the documents on the long dining table. "You've all been celebrating a lie," I said. "Daniel is no heir." My parents rewrote wills, forged signatures, and erased me because I was different. But my grandfather left the truth in my hands. Daniel laughed nervously. "You're delusional, Ryan. No one will believe you." I turned to Collins, who had slipped in quietly. He nodded, raising another folder. "We believe him," he said firmly. Every eye in the room snapped back to me. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the storm they never saw coming. The guests leaned forward, curiosity crackling like fire. My parents' faces drained of color. Daniel forced a laugh, but his hands trembled against his glass. Collins spread the forged documents under the golden light of the chandeliers. "Here," he said clearly, "is the so-called will Daniel claims gives him everything. But look closely, the signature is a forgery. Expert reports confirm it. Ryan's parents erased his name by breaking the law." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I stepped closer, placing my grandfather's letter beside the forgeries. His familiar handwriting, his seal, his words, undeniable. "My grandfather trusted me," I said, my voice steady. "He left me shares, accounts, and properties. The proof has always been here. They just wanted me silent." Daniel shot to his feet, his voice cracking. "Lies. All lies." But Samuel, standing tall among the servants, spoke firmly. "I was there. I kept copies your father tried to burn. Ryan is the true heir." The room erupted, guests whispering, eyes shifting from Daniel's arrogance to my quiet strength. For the first time in my life, the truth didn't hide in shadows. It shone brighter than every chandelier in that room. The silence broke into chaos. Guests murmured, voices rising like a storm. Some shook their heads at Daniel, others stared at my parents with disgust. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "I'm the heir. I deserve it all." "He's nothing but," his words cut off when Collins held up a stamped court order. "Not anymore," Collins said firmly. "As of tonight, Ryan is recognized as the legal heir. Daniel, you hold nothing. Every car, every mansion, every cent tied to the estate now belongs to Ryan." My mother gasped. "This can't be true." But Samuel added quietly, "It is. I saw your lies. I carried the truth for years, waiting for this moment." Daniel's face twisted with rage. He looked smaller than ever, a spoiled child exposed before the world. My father's proud shoulders slumped, his reputation collapsing in front of wealthy guests who once admired him. One by one, people rose from their chairs, not to cheer Daniel, but to turn their backs on him. I stood still, heart steady. The boy they mocked, the son they discarded, was now the man holding everything. Their empire of cruelty had finally crumbled. The room grew colder than winter. My parents sat frozen at the long table, their proud faces cracked into fear and shame. For the first time in my life, they looked small. My mother's lips trembled. "Ryan, you don't understand. We only wanted the best for Daniel. He was strong, perfect. We thought." "You thought I was less," I interrupted, my voice firm. "You saw my Down syndrome as weakness, not worth. You gave him everything and left me with nothing but shame." My father lowered his head, unable to meet my eyes. The guests watched in silence, their judgment heavy in the air. One guest whispered, "How could they do this to their own son?" Another shook his head. "Cruelty always finds the light." My parents reached for Daniel, but even he pulled away, humiliated by their exposure. Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't cry. "Not this time. You didn't just betray me," I said. "You betrayed grandfather's trust, this family's name, and the love that should have bound us." My parents had built their pride on Daniel's false throne. Now they sat in ruins, drowning in the shame they once forced on me. As the room settled, all eyes turned to me. For years, I was invisible, mocked, silenced, hidden in a chalet meant for servants. But tonight, I stood taller than I ever had before. Collins placed the final documents in front of me. "Ryan Spencer," he said clearly, "you are the rightful heir of this family's wealth, estates, and legacy." The words echoed like thunder. I took a deep breath and looked around. Guests nodded with respect, servants straightened with pride, and Samuel's old eyes shone with tears. Daniel sat hunched, furious and powerless. My parents bowed their heads, broken beneath the truth. "I don't rise tonight out of anger," I said, my voice steady. "I rise because kindness, patience, and truth are stronger than greed. My Down syndrome never made me less. It made me see what others could not: loyalty, compassion, and real strength." Applause filled the hall, not for Daniel, not for my parents, but for me, the son they called worthless. I was no longer the forgotten one. I was the heir. The boy cast aside had become the man who carried it all, with quiet dignity. When the dinner ended, the mansion no longer belonged to Daniel. The laughter and praise that once surrounded him faded into whispers of pity and shame. My parents left the hall in silence, their heads bowed beneath the weight of their choices. I didn't chase them. Their punishment was already complete. They had to live with the truth, that the son they cast aside was the heir all along. The next morning, I stood on the balcony of the estate, the rising sun warming my face. Samuel stood beside me, smiling proudly. "Your grandfather would be at peace, Ryan," he said. I nodded. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not because of the wealth, the cars, or the power, but because the shame they tried to place on me was gone. The servants no longer saw me as the forgotten one. The guests no longer pitied me. They respected me. I whispered to myself, justice isn't revenge, it's truth finally revealed. And with that truth, I began a new chapter. Not as the broken son. Not as the forgotten brother. But as Ryan Spencer, the rightful heir, strong in silence, and finally at peace. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more powerful narratives, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what part hit you the hardest. Thanks for watching.